I am Linda van Tilburg for National Security News. US lawmakers are pushing for targeted sanctions against South Africa and a review of South Africa's ties with the United States. That's in addition to a 30% tariff on the country. I have Joshua Meservey from the Hudson Institute in Washington with me to discuss that. Joshua, thanks so much for joining us. Well, earlier you predicted this outcome.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is the trend that has been developing for a while, or the trajectory, I should say. Now, I say it's unfortunate, not because I think it's the wrong thing for the United States to do. I think it's the right thing, frankly. But I think it's unfortunate that the ANC has behaved in such a way that the United States feels like it has really little choice but to do these types of targeted sanctions. So what you're referring to, of course, is a congressman yesterday introduced a bill into the House that called for, among other things, targeted sanctions, or at least, let me say, a report from the executive branch, from the president, listing anyone within the ANC or within the South African government who is sanctionable according to the Global Magnitsky Act, which we also talked about that act the last time you and I chatted.
So are these changes as sweeping as you anticipated?
It's quite sweeping. There's really very few restrictions on the type of people that this report could name. So it says ANC leaders or government, South African government officials. That's the only criteria, essentially, as far as the type of person they'll be looking at. Now, obviously, within those groups of people, they need to ensure that those people have engaged in sanctionable conduct, which is outlined. What that type of conduct is outlined in the Global Magnitsky Act.
Joshua, can you walk us through the steps on what will happen next?
Sure. So this has simply been introduced. So it is important to remember this is not statute. This isn't law. It does have to go through a process before it can become law. And that process, like all bills that get introduced, or like the process for all bills that get introduced, is fraught just because of the system in the United States within Congress. So yes, it has to be passed in the House, and then it has to be passed on the Senate, and then the president would have to sign it if it's going to become a law. So it can be a long and arduous process for bills. Many never even make it to get a full vote, for instance, or some never even get out of committee. So it is as I say, a fairly fraught process. There's no guarantees that it passes. I've heard that there's some optimism on the Hill that it will pass.
Do you think all Republican congressmen will support this, or might there be some that argue this goes too far?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I think most Republicans would, of course, support it. I think it's possible you get some Democrats supporting this as well. Again, I always like to remind people a lot of the public frustration that the U.S. government started to voice about South Africa and the ANC's actions started under the Biden administration. So there's been concern on both sides of the aisle about ANC actions for years, really. So it's possible you get some Democrats. It's possible maybe some Republicans who just have an ideological hesitance around sanctions might not support it. That is possible, but it's very hard to really game that out because there's so many, especially on the House side. There's hundreds of congressmen we're talking about.
You mentioned that some Democrats might actually support this. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, I think it's possible. As I said, this has been a bipartisan concern for years. It's not a particularly new thing, and really, ever since the former South African ambassador to the former U.S. ambassador to South Africa aired in that famous press conference the accusations that a sanctioned Russian ship had docked at Simonstown and had received weapons. The ANC has done nothing to sort of assuage the concerns that the U.S. was voicing, to that specific issue in the press conference, the Lady R issue, but then the broader issue that it sort of arose from. In fact, ANC has continued to provoke the United States. That's very strongly how it's viewed here in Washington, D.C.
In this legislation, South Africa has faced criticism for maintaining diplomatic relations with China and Russia. Is that criticism fair, given that many countries have similar ties?
Yeah, it's the bill highlights not just normal diplomatic relations that South Africa has with Russia or China, but the quite overt, even aggressive support for China and Russia. So it references the joint military operations that South Africa has engaged in with both those countries off the coast. It talks about South Africa's active seeking of closer and deeper relations with Russia, including sending senior diplomats all the way up to President Ramaphosa to Moscow to say very nice things about Russia and Putin, about Russian President Putin. So it's not just normal diplomatic relations that the bill is expressing concern about. Now, I think it's interesting. I looked at the bill. I even counted the lines, and the great majority of the lines are dedicated, expressing concern, are dedicated to this issue of Israel, Iran, Hamas. It's actually the first section as well of the bill where the bill starts to lay out the concerns that the United States has. So I would say that's the preeminent concern. And then you have Russia and then China, of course. China has the second most lines in the bill, and Russia has the third. So I think you don't want to read too much sometimes into these things, but that actually I think might be useful for understanding the hierarchy of concerns expressed within this bill.
Joshua, could you tell us more about the congressman who introduced this bill?
Yeah, so this is Congressman Ronny Jackson, Representative Jackson. He's from Texas. He used to be a physician in the White House. So he was President Barack Obama's physician, but then he was also President Trump's physician. So he has, at least at one point, had a quite close relationship with the president. Recently, so he's on the Africa subcommittee, which is on the House side of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And he recently was in DRC, along with a few other countries, reportedly carrying messages from President Trump and looking into the range of issues that DRC and the region are experiencing. So I think it's safe to say that he has at least some access to the White House and is probably quite closely aligned with President Trump's vision on foreign policy and in other areas. And I think it's highly likely that this bill was written because of the signals that the Trump administration has been sending on South Africa, where not hard to hear the skepticism and the frustration that the Trump administration has been expressing about South Africa. So Congress, or in this case, Representative Jackson, wanted to take action on that. And it's also worth noting this is a bill that's built off of another bill that was introduced in the previous Congress by Representative James, who was at the time the ranking member of the Africa subcommittee, or the chair actually of the Africa subcommittee. So that bill was never passed, but now it's been reintroduced, and with this section on targeted sanctions, that's the primary difference between the two bills, is that this report regarding targeted sanctions is now included in the bill.
Well, this seems like a double whammy for South Africa, especially with the Trump administration's 30% tariffs. How bad could this get? Could it escalate any further?
It can get much, much worse than this. One of the reasons that I've advocated for targeted sanctions, as I've been doing for months now, frankly, is because I think it is probably the best way to change ANC behavior with the least collateral damage. The other measures that are potentially could be instituted have immense collateral damage. If the United States imposes banking sanctions, for instance, I've been told by senior South African businessmen that it would crush the South African economy, and I think that's correct. If it imposed SWIFT sanctions, if it cut South Africa off, South African banks in South Africa from the SWIFT system, also a devastating economic blow. So yeah, there's a host of other tools that the United States could reach for, if there's not really substantive change from the ANC. And the ANC, I think, has a pretty clear idea at this point of what would need to change, or the types of things, let me say, that would need to change. So as we would say in the United States, the ball is in their court.
If the ball is in the ANC's court, as you said, is there anything they could propose to change the Trump administration's stance?
I think they would have to cease a lot of their hostility towards Israel and this international campaign against Israel. Now, actually, I'm not sure that means dropping the ICJ case. I would like to see it dropped. I think it's fatuous and has no basis. But I'm not sure that's even exactly what the United States' demand is here. But it would be stepping back from it and being far less aggressive about prosecuting that case. And again, I always want to make this point. Part of the frustration the United States has over the ICJ case is that it's so clearly an immense double standard. The ANC is the very same party that defends and promotes Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, Russia, as we've already talked about, China. It's defended China's treatment of the Uyghurs, which a UN report has described as potentially being ethnic cleansing. So this is the group, this is the political party that now claims it is morally obliged to bring this case against Israel at the ICJ. It doesn't hold water. It's obviously a pretty threadbare excuse for wanting to pursue, seeing an opportunity to use the international courts to prosecute a country that, frankly, the ANC has hated for decades. It has a long running history of animus. So it's really galling from the United States to observe this and to see the ANC doing this, and then also trying to drape itself in moral finery and trying to convince everybody that it's doing this because it's a moral actor. The ANC is not a moral actor. It's highly cynical, actually.
Can we look at the ambassadors? The US has nominated Brent Bozell as the new ambassador to South Africa. Would he be welcome in South Africa right now?
I think he's going to have a very difficult assignment, frankly. But I do not know him. I've never met him. But from everything I've heard, he sounds like he will be up for it. He's tough. He is well connected, I believe, to the White House, which is always important if you're going to be a really effective ambassador in a difficult situation. He is no stranger at all to political brawls, let's say. He's been a conservative activist here in the United States, fighting the fights for decades. So he's, again, very familiar with tough, difficult fights. So yeah, this is going to be hard. I don't think anyone should sugarcoat it. I'm sure he's under no illusions himself. But maybe there's something that can be done. I think he will communicate clearly to the ANC the United States' displeasure and what needs to change for this relationship to get back on track.
South Africa has yet to nominate an ambassador. What steps could they take to ease tensions? Who do you think might be a suitable choice?
Well, they should not send an ideologue like the previous ambassador. They should not send somebody who has called President Trump a white supremacist and compared him to ISIS. That would be a good start, I would say. So I think it has to be someone who is temperate, who is reasonable, who is willing to listen, and is willing to work really, really hard. And because this is hard right now, and it's going to continue to be hard for the foreseeable future, I would say. So I hope they do send an ambassador soon, and I hope it is someone who understands that this relationship has cratered, and that the ANC's behavior is what is driving the U.S. response. And if he or she is starting from that perspective, then maybe they have a chance to be effective.
Joshua Meservey from the Hudson Institute in Washington, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Linda.
Thanks, Josh.